Welcome to the Excruciating Minutiae Podcast, where we obsess about sports, pop culture, and politics, but mostly sports. Here are your hosts, Randy and Steven.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Excruciating Minutia, where we'll be talking today about the Super Bowl upcoming this Sunday. We'll be making our picks, which I'm sure are going to be just as fantastic as all the other picks we've made, right, Steven?
My picks are going to be better than they've ever been. I have done more research in the last 20 minutes than I've done all season long. So
you've studied hard.
Studied short and hard, yes.
Study long, study wrong. That was the old saying, as if I remember correctly. Well, on the bright side, our picks can't do anything but get better since they've been so terrible. And we're not just going to be talking about the game and previewing the upcoming Super Bowl and making our picks on that. We'll be looking at a bunch of prop bets because, as you mentioned on a previous podcast, you will be headed to Atlantic City where there's legal sports betting. And this will be your first actual official legal bets on the sport of professional football, or any sport for that matter. And we'll be talking about some of the prop bets for the game, some of the crazy bets, some of the things you can and cannot, I'd say things you can't bet on this game, but pretty much you can bet on almost anything happening in this game, judging by the sheet you sent me that I briefly scanned over. We'll be talking about that and just about some gambling, sports gambling in general, and the way the landscape in the country has changed over the last few years in regards to that. But first off, we'll be talking about the Super Bowl, and we have the much anticipated matchup of the Rams and the Pats coming. And right now, the line is sitting at New England, a 2.5-point favorite, correct? With an over-under of 57.5. Is that the latest we're looking at?
That is up to the moment. There has been a little bit of movement. I believe one of the sports books out in Vegas has the line at 3, but they are the only one. So 2.5 seems to be where it's settled. The over-under 57.5, which would make it the highest over-under in Super Bowl history.
Now we're looking at Westgate, Las Vegas sportsbook, correct, for our odds. That's where, whenever we're going to be quoting odds or numbers, that's where we're pulling it from.
That's correct.
Not being a big sports gambler, my guess is that from one sports book to another, you're looking at things that are going to be very similar. There's not really big disparities from one to the other. But as you mentioned, somebody you said has moved the line to 3. But for references of this particular podcast, as of when we're taping this, which is on Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening, these are the official numbers. So this is all, of course, subject to change. But we're not really here just to talk about gambling, right? We're here to talk about the game itself.
Right. We're using the Westgate because they are considered to be the world leader in proposition wagering. So not every sports book does the kind of investment in proposition wagering that they do. They have a 36-page book of wagers, and we'll go through some of those a little bit later.
So we won't just be talking about sports gambling and obviously all the different prop bets and all the ways that we can contribute our money to the gambling institution of our choice to help them replace their tile or their ornate decorations or their fancy chairs or whatever the case may be. We're actually going to be talking about the game itself and making our picks and discussing the Super Bowl and who we think is going to actually win this one. And as I said, we've been so wrong on pretty much everything else. So why stop now? Let's get our picks out of the way. Let's talk about the game itself. New England looking for what will this be? The 7th Super Bowl?
This would be their 7th Super Bowl.
The Rams looking for their first Super Bowl since returning to LA, but it would be their second in franchise history. Of course, they won with the greatest show on turf back when they were in St. Louis. The dynasty of the Patriots, the veteran quarterback, arguably one of the greatest, if not the greatest quarterback of all time in Tom Brady, the young gun in Jared Goff, the grizzled veteran head coach in Bill Belichick, looking to just continue his legacy of dominance in the head coaching ranks versus the young gun in McVay, the new wave of coaching that he's leading as teams continue to look for the next McVay, looking for their young person to lead their franchise for the next 20 or 30 years or whatever the case may be. It's a very interesting contrast in these teams and how they got there. The Rams were always considered to be a favorite in the NFC all season, even though the Saints ended up as the number one seed. Many people thought it was going to come down to the Rams and the Saints. So the fact that the Rams are here are no real surprise. There are a lot of people that are surprised the Patriots are here because, as we had talked about on a previous podcast, we never really felt the Pats were the best team in the AFC up until they ended up the best team in the AFC at the end of the AFC title game. So here we are. It's going to be a very interesting game. I think it's going to be a very good game. I would like to hear your thoughts on who you're picking. I would deferring to you first, not to put you on the spot, but mainly because even at this point, I'm not really 100% sure of what to go with. Other than, as we had talked before, I'm sure whatever my instinct will be wrong. But in the interim, while I sit here and mull over flip-flopping back and forth on who I'd like to go with and why, Patriots and Rams, who do you got?
I have picked against New England throughout these playoffs, and I think now is the time to do the opposite.
If every instinct you have is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right.
I also feel that we talked a few episodes ago about the National Day calendar.
Yes.
And when we post this, we're recording this on Tuesday because I'm headed down to Atlantic City. Probably going to post this on Friday. Friday will be National Backward Day. And I believe that is kind of that's what's going to drive me here on my pick. I'm going opposite to what I would normally pick. And what I would pick would be, I'm going to pick against Tom Brady because I think New England is kind of on the downslide. The Rams are the up-and-coming team. But I'm going with the opposite. I'm going backwards to what I would normally do. So I am going to pick the Patriots minus 2.5. I believe the over-under will be over. Even though it's a pretty high number, I feel like New England's going to jump out to a big lead. The Rams will be forced to throw the ball a lot to try to catch up. I sort of feel like this is kind of a 38-28 game. That's what this kind of feels like to me.
38-28 would be the over. Yeah, that would be a high scoring game.
Yes, and I feel like New England will find ways to stop the attack of the Rams. As we talked about when we were breaking down the AFC title game a couple of weeks ago, we talked about how New England basically decided they were going to take Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce out of the game because those are the two biggest weapons. And they were very successful at doing that. And they said, you know what, Damian Williams, you go ahead and beat us. You know what, Sammy Watkins, go ahead. You go crazy. Those guys aren't going to beat us. So I have a feeling that New England is going to basically say, we're going to take Brandon Cooks out of the game. We're going to try to limit the running game. And they're going to say, you know what, Goff, you beat us, but we're taking away your number one target. I think that they're going to be successful doing that.
You're taking the Pats. I'm taking the Pats
minus 2.5.
And taking the over. Among other bets. I'll just be one of many.
Correct.
I am not sure what to do here. And as you said, when your instinct is always wrong, you go with the opposite. But I really have mulled over this all week. I've mulled over it since I started mulling over it as soon as we knew who was going to be in the championship. I think there are different X factors that are going to be in play here that I'm not sure how to account for. I mentioned the Patriots have never looked like the best team in the AFC. They feel like how they're favored in this game, I think, is simply a testament to the legacy of Belichick and Brady, that there's been money put on them. And I think we mentioned in a previous podcast that the Rams actually opened as the favorites and the money line moved to the Patriots with money going on to them.
To talk to that, I saw this point earlier. In Vegas, when you're talking about large bets, the big guys, the guys who know what they're doing, right? 5-figure bets. For every one bet on the Rams, there have been 10 bets on New England.
That's pretty telling, perhaps.
And all of the 6-figure bets have been on New England.
My thinking on this game is I'm going to go with the Patriots. I'm actually going to go with the under, however, which may seem to be a little strange, but my thinking is this. The formula the Patriots used to some extent to beat Kansas City is going to be in play here. When you give Bill Belichick multiple weeks to prepare for an opponent, then he has a very good way of taking certain players out of a game, taking certain teams out of their rhythm. But it's not always been the case. We look back at games the Patriots have lost in the Super Bowl, particularly those two games to the Giants, and those were high-powered Patriot offenses who put up a lot of points, who then kind of fizzled out and struggled once they got into the Super Bowl, which would almost indicate that, well, if you're going to pick the under, maybe you would go with the Rams to win this type of game. I feel, however, that the Patriots are going to have a plan to take Todd Gurley out of the game plan, except I'm still not 100% sure that Todd Gurley is going to be as much of a part of the game plan as Rams fans would hope he would be. I'm still not sure we've heard 100% what's wrong with Gurley, how healthy Gurley is, and if whatever we're hearing about it is actually accurate, because the Rams are going to be coy. So, I haven't heard much in the line of interviews this week or what's being said and not being said, but my guess is that if Gurley is still not 100%, because he wasn't 100%, I don't care what the official line was about game flow or anything like that during the Saints game, there's no reason C.J. Anderson's on the field ahead of Todd Gurley as much as he was, unless something was wrong with Gurley. And I'm not 100% sure that Gurley is completely recovered. Now, a couple extra weeks of rest will certainly get you perhaps ready to be your effective self. But if there's any chance Gurley's not at 100%, that's a major blow to the Rams. Before, when we were talking about the NFC title game, we discussed how much the loss of Cooper Kupp earlier in the season may have affected the Ram offense, that they kind of lost a step in the second half of the season and weren't quite as explosive as we'd seen them before. If you're the Rams, you need to be able to run the ball. You're going to need to be able to effectively pass the ball. There's things you need to do, and the Patriot defense has played much better. And they let Patrick Mahomes had a good solid game, and Damian Williams actually had a pretty good game. If you were playing in a fantasy league, he put up numbers, but they did take off their main weapons and Hill and Kelsey. And when I look at the Rams, I don't see a receiver as explosive as Tyreek Hill. I don't see a tight end anywhere near the level of Travis Kelsey. And Jared Goff, as good as he is, Patrick Mahomes is better. And the Patriots beat that team. I'm looking at the Rams, and I just don't see as much of a personnel advantage. Now, defensively, the Rams, I think, have personnel advantages. They have more talent on the defensive side, but the Patriots, this is classic Belichick-type teams where they've been getting solid defensive efforts here in the playoffs and keeping teams where they needed to keep them. And it's kind of unheralded guys, not a who's who, it's a who's that when you look at some of the Patriot defensive players. But they kept Kansas City in check enough to keep them in the game, in a position to win the game. I think you're going to see a game plan very similar to what we saw in their game against Kansas City. I think s01e Michel is a huge X factor from their standpoint, where if the Patriots can run the ball, run the clock, do a lot of short passing, Edelman has a big game. James White has a big game out of the backfield again, receiving the ball. They run the ball effectively. And I do believe the Rams had issues, stopping the run at times over the course of the season. That could be the key to the game. But that would also, lead to a little bit of a lower scoring game, which is why I'm going to go with the under, but I'm going to go with the Patriots because I made the mistake in the championship game of picking against Brady and Belichick. And when we had discussed their game against the Chargers, I chided you to some extent for saying, you're picking against them. I'm not picking against them until they prove to me that they're not still Brady and Belichick. And then I was an idiot and did the exact same thing I said you shouldn't do and picked against them in the AFC title game. I'm not doing that again. I'm going to go with New England. I'm going to go with them to cover. I'm going to go with the under. And I think this is going to be the crowning maybe the last crowning achievement. And I did see a note where Brady said he is planning on not retiring no matter what happens, correct? That was the note that came out where I guess he was asked about it, and he said he is 100% coming back.
That is correct. He said he was coming back. Other people said that they were not sure. I think Gronkowski said he was going to take some time after the season, no matter win or lose, and make a determination. I believe one of the McCourty brothers said that he may retire if they win to go out on top. But Brady said he's coming back 100%. No matter win or lose, does not matter to him. He is not done in his mind. 41 years old and still going strong.
If the Pats lose, he's absolutely coming back because he's not going to want to go out on a loss. If the Patriots win, it would seem to be a great point because we always talk about great athletes and going out on top. This would seem to be the ultimate time for him to hang it up and say, I'm going to spend time with my family. I'm going to move on to other things. I'm 41. There's a lot of preparation that goes into being as good as he is during the season, before the season, all the physical work, all the abuse your body takes. It's got to be, it gets to be tough when you get to be that age. Heck, we know what it's like at our age, and we don't do anything nearly as physical as play professional football. And we feel, right? We feel it from a day-to-day basis at our increasing ages. So I can only imagine what he's going through. But he is such a competitor, and you can just see that fire to be the best and to win has not gone out. And that's where I think when with an athlete, where when that fire goes out and you don't want to put in that extra effort because you're getting up there in age and it's tiring, and you've decided, there's plenty of players who've just reached the point where it's like that fire just isn't there anymore. Brady, that's not the case. So I think, yes, even if they win, I think he's definitely coming back. An interesting question I'd like to talk about here is, obviously, if the Rams win, there would be a passing of the torch, I would say, to some extent. We might be looking at the Rams as your next I don't want to say super team or super dynasty because it's so hard for teams to do that. I mean, we were talking about Seattle as a dynasty a few years ago, and what did they do? They won one Super Bowl, they lost to the Patriots, and then they never went back, right? And now the remnants of that team, a lot of that team has been dismantled and is in other places, and the defense certainly has been. And even though they made the playoffs this year, that was not really a very long-lived dynasty in Seattle, was it?
No.
Dynasties in the NFL do not last like the Patriots do, but certainly the Rams, win or lose, are going to be heavily favored to at least be part of the conversation next year, even if they're not the top favored team in the NFC. And we'll talk about that at the very end. They're certainly going to be a team that'll be in the conversation. A victory would certainly leave them as one of the teams in the conversation, if not the favorite going into next year. They have very young players, and of course, obviously, their young coach. The Patriots winning just puts another exclamation point on their period of dominance. My question for you is, if Brady and Belichick lose this Super Bowl, that would drop them to 6-4 because they have the two losses to the Giants. They have the loss to the Eagles. This would be a fourth loss. Does that taint in any way versus a player like Joe Montana, who never lost the Super Bowl, or Terry Bradshaw, who, not that anyone puts Terry Bradshaw on the greatest quarterbacks of all time, but does it taint the fact that they have made as many Super Bowls? And this would be a fourth Super Bowl that they will have lost as the favorite, because they were favored heavily against at least one of those Giant teams, if not both of them. And they were favored against the Eagles last year. And that was probably a substantial favorite last year, if I can guess. This would be four Super Bowls they will have lost as a favorite. Does that in any way diminish what they've done? I mean, I can't believe it does, because, I mean, that's still going to the Super Bowl this many times. Your thoughts on that?
I don't think it diminishes it because they've been so dominant for such a long time. This is the 9th Super Bowl appearance in 19 years. Has there ever been a team in pro football who has done this kind of dominance with the same two main pieces, with the coach and the quarterback? It's never happened. So I don't really think it matters. I mean, obviously it looks better if they do, but just the fact of getting there is pretty amazing for such a long stretch of time. You talk about how Seattle was going to be the next great dynasty, right? And they were 2-out. That's it. I think the next dynasty, if there is one, is probably Kansas City. I think Mahomes is a better quarterback. He's going to be the next great quarterback, more so than Goff.
I could see that, yes.
He has the handicap of Andy Reid, but his talent is far, far more than what Goff has. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I don't think that they have to win this game, the Patriots.
To make a quick correction, too, by the way, I'm referring to the Patriots having won 6. They're looking for their 6th championship. So I think I said if they would lose, they'd be 6-4. They would actually be 5-4 in the Brady Belichick era. So not 6-4. So a correction on my numbers on that one. So yeah, 5-4 in a Super Bowl record. I mean, we were talking earlier today on an unrelated subject about, greatest basketball player of all time. And I made the argument for Michael Jordan. And one of the reasons was, against over LeBron, not just because I think he's still the best player of all time and better than LeBron, was the fact that when the Bulls made the NBA title championship series, the Bulls just didn't lose. And Jordan refused to let them lose. They went 6-0, whereas LeBron is, his record is under 500, even though he's made all these NBA titles. And I was just wondering, if that was kind of where I was going with that, whether or not if New England loses again, they're one game over 500 in Super Bowl appearances. But then again, you're making this many Super Bowl appearances. You've made this many championship games. And who else has done that? We have franchises who still have never made the Super Bowl at this point. What is it? Is it 4 teams that have never made the Super Bowl? And 2 of them are essentially expansion teams, or not super recent, because we haven't had a very recent NFL expansion team. But I believe the 4 teams to never make the Super Bowl, if I'm correct, the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are an expansion team or were, the Cleveland Browns, which never made it originally as the Cleveland Browns, though once they moved to Baltimore, they did. But once they got the franchise back in Cleveland, obviously they've not come anywhere near a Super Bowl. And your other 2 are the Houston Texans, which are an expansion team, correct? And then there's the Detroit Lions, which are by no means an expansion team, even though they tend to play like one in many, many seasons. So you have franchises who can't even get there. So there's no shame in losing a Super Bowl, or especially when you make it this many times. But whatever happens on Sunday, there's definitely going to be a narrative. It's either going to be the Rams or the new power potentially in the NFC. And how many can they get to, and how many can they win? And, putting that on a resume of a quarterback like Goff at this young of an age will be a remarkable achievement. But if the Pats win, then again, even the people who hate the Patriots, and God, there are so many people who hate the Patriots, and for many reasons. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's, resentful of their success, particularly if you're a team that the Patriots beat up on like a bass drum on a regular basis. You're a Bills fan. I mean, the feeling, right? You still have to respect what they've done. It's as remarkable, and we talked about before, as remarkable a stretch as we could see in the NFL, and one we may never see again.
I'm going to be hesitant to call any team the next dynasty, because we know what happens typically in football. Team will have a run, it lasts a year or 2, and then it's an absolute dumpster fire very soon after that. How long ago was it that Arizona was in the Super Bowl?
Wasn't that
long?
It
only it wasn't that many years ago, and they're literally just awful, just terrible.
Arguably the worst team in football. Yep.
Right. Seattle, now they're running into issues, right? They're having a hard time keeping their core of players together. So they're having to retool. The problem is that you get a nice run, and then free agency hits and guys want to get paid, and these teams can't do it with the salary cap. So they have to retool. And New England is better than any team ever probably in the history of football at retooling, about taking away parts and getting rid of pieces and saying, you know what, we're going to get rid of that. We want to get rid of a guy a year too early rather than a year too late. You know, they let Nate Solder leave this year, right? Their left tackle. And they get some guy off the scrap heap. I believe it was from the Rams, if I'm not mistaken. Put him in at left tackle. Guy makes the all-pro team. So until I see another team be able to retool on a quick basis every 3 or 4 years, they can't be a dynasty. They just can't. Unless they do what Dallas did a few years ago, which is win 3 out of 4 Super Bowls, right? Then even though it's a short window, that's a dynasty. You have to do that.
It's funny you mentioned the Cardinals as they were in a Super Bowl and what's happened to them since then. What if I told you the Cardinals have already gone through multiple rebuilding phases because they went to the Super Bowl and lost that heartbreaker in 2008 to the Steelers.
Jeez, it was that long ago.
Yes.
It felt like it was 3 or 4 years ago.
This is why you feel that way. In 2009, they won the NFC West. They beat the Packers in that wild card game. Then they lost to the Saints here in New Orleans in the divisional playoffs. They followed that up. This was Ken Wisenhunt was the head coach at the time. They followed that up with a 5-11 season, 8-8, then 5-11, and that was the end of Wisenhunt. They had 2 years where that was their window, and then they were a 500 team one season and dead last in the NFC West the next 2 seasons. Bruce Arians came on. That was in 2013. They won 10 games, missed the playoffs because the NFC West was loaded that year. They went 11-5, lost in the wild card round in 2014, won the NFC West in 2015, beat the Packers in overtime, lost the NFC Championship game to Carolina, and then they went 7-8-1, 8-8. Arians retired, left the job, and then, of course, they had the disaster of this season. So talking about retooling, the Cardinals went from we are in the Super Bowl to we're not any good to hey, we're good again to hey, we're not any good again. And that's been the span of 10 years that's happened. So they've had already 2 ebbs and flows. And that right there is perfect illustration of the way the NFL works. And as far as it's hard to maintain a consistent performance year in and year out just because the salary cap and the way the structure works and the draft and everything it's built for parity. The late Pete Rozelle would be proud at the continual changing of the guard amongst teams as contenders and, keeping fan bases always feeling like we're this close to being a potential Super Bowl team, which is good for the sport. And the Patriots defy that. And you just have to respect that.
I used a bad example, a much better example than...
I think it was a good example just because they've had so many ups and... Like I said, they've already had that many ups and downs. So
what I was trying to get to is like you make a run and then 2 years later, you're just garbage. And Denver is a perfect example of that, right? They won Super Bowl 50. Now, granted, part of that was the fact that Peyton Manning retired, but they've been through 3 coaches since then. It's only been 3 years. And they've been through this will be their 3rd coach in that time frame.
Yeah, the wheels came off of them pretty quickly.
Really fast. 2 years ago, Atlanta was the runner-up, right? They were a dumpster fire this year. They still have a ton of talent, but they were just terrible. The team that Denver beat in Super Bowl 50, Carolina, another team that was just awful this year. It couldn't get out of their own way. Philadelphia won last year and barely made the playoffs this year. They needed so much help. They needed to beat.
That's the team I was going to reference was the Eagles, Super Bowl champions last year, beginning of a dynasty, sneak into the playoffs this season. And you look at the Eagles and you'd say, well, the Dallas is still going to be a competitive team and is going to be problems in the division next year. You have the Bears kind of ascending in their division. You have the Saints will still presumably be very good. You'll have the Rams. I mean, you certainly won't have Philly anywhere near a favorite to come out of the NFC. And again, we'll get to that, but just looking really quickly, Vegas already has odds on next season posted for Super Bowl or championship aspirations. And I'm looking already, and there's 5 teams ahead of Philly as far as the odds go. The Philly is a 20-1 for next season. And so, yeah, did the Philly dynasty, is it over? It was over before it began, right? I mean, but it's the nature of the sport. And again, it's why New England's run has been just absolutely remarkable. It's something we will probably never see again when Belichick retires, and which is, I believe, is going to be Brady and Belichick will go out together, is my guess. That's going to probably be the end of the New England dynasty, and we may never see anything like that again. I mean, we're getting up there in age. We're not super old, but we're getting to the point where I'm not sure we'll see it again in our lifetime. Or if we do, we might be so old we may not remember it. So that could be the way it works. But I think I said it when we were discussing the NFC and AFC title games. I was just kind of in awe. I was left speechless by the fact New England won yet again. And I'm still kind of like that today. I'm still amazed. I don't know how they got here. And I have a feeling when they're lifting up the trophy on Sunday, or at least the way I think they will be, I'm going to be saying the same thing. I have no idea how they got here, but props to them. Which means anyone listening to this, go throw your money on the Rams right now.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
I think we just jinxed. I know I definitely probably just jinxed them. So sorry, New England fans. That's on me. My bad.
Hello, everyone. This is Steven. This Super Bowl 53 podcast ran extremely long, so we've decided to split this into 2 episodes. We'll be back tomorrow with the second part, where we discuss the prop bets available for Super Bowl 53. Until then, thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for listening to the Excruciating Minutiae Podcast. Check us out at excruciatingpodcast.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on any of your favorite podcast platforms and follow us on Twitter at excruciatingpod. See you at the next episode.